It's been described as the Super Bowl of intellectuals, the recent debate between Dr. Jordan B. Peterson and Dr. Richard Dawkins. Their talk ranged from Dostoevsky to dragons to DNA, but if you're familiar with these two figures and their works, it'll be clear that this conversation was really a thinly veiled debate on humanity's greatest question: does God exist? As you might expect, it ended in a stalemate, leaving each person right where they started on the matter, along with the rest of the audience. As your philosopher queen, I found this resolution unacceptable. I believe it is the duty of the philosophers to provide satisfying answers to the deepest questions in order for us to earn our keep as a caste of society given the luxury to sit around and think about them. And I figured this is as opportune a moment as any to drop some truth bombs from my unified theory of quantum reality I've been working on for 5 years, which I dub the Order of MayyHemm. So today, I will be single-handedly debating two of the most highly esteemed intellectuals of our time. If I make a fool of myself, I have no one to blame but myself. This is Dawkins versus Peterson versus MayyHemm. But first, 60 seconds of exposition.
The world's most famous atheist and recently ranked the world's most influential thinker, Professor Richard Dawkins.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
I want to talk to you about your new book, We Who Wrestle with God.
Turns out that a book is more durable than stone. It's more durable than a castle. It's more durable than an empire.
Dr. Richard Dawkins is a famous scientific critic of religion and the author of the book, The God Delusion. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson debated him this week because he's promoting his new book, We Who Wrestle with God. And I'm MayyHemm. Musician, philosopher, cult leader, human. I created this channel to give humanity answers to the deepest questions about life, the universe, and everything. Because I've developed a comprehensive theory of reality that gives answers to these questions that I believe will be satisfying to the deeply religious and devoutly scientific alike. So today, I'm going to use it to answer the question, does God exist? Let's begin.
Do you believe that as a fact, that Jesus died for our sins?
There are elements of the texts that I don't claim to understand. What my experience has been that the more deeply I look into these texts, the more I learn.
I think, Dr. Peterson, you're drunk on symbols.
Dawkins and Peterson spent much of their conversation debating various points of the Bible. But if you're familiar with their works, you can infer that the real question under all of their questions was whether or not to believe in God. Many of the roadblocks in their discussion came as a result of dancing around this issue rather than facing it head-on, avoiding the explicit question, but each trying to answer it without saying that's what they're doing. The problem is this removes most opportunities to come to any agreement because they're starting too far down their respective lines of reasoning with their assumptions on this pivotal point already solidified further up the line. You have to start back at the source in order to resolve the discordance, the same way evolution moves from simple to complex organisms, but not backwards. Otherwise, you get clashes like this.
What I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
It's only the right question to ask if you're trying to use the Bible to prove or disprove the existence of God. But the Bible isn't about proof, it's about faith, which makes it the wrong tool to solve the problem of lacking proof. But the issue itself of whether finding proof for God is possible is a brilliant question Dawkins has spent his life asking, and one that deserves an answer. You have to start with that problem and find the right tool to attempt to fix it with. As I said, Due to its symbolic rather than factual nature, the Bible is not the best tool for that purpose. But if God existed before the Bible, indeed before anything, you should be able to prove God's existence without the Bible, right? So where else do you look for proof of God? First, you have to know what you're looking for. So let's create a working definition of God. How about this? An invisible force of the universe that is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, that existed before time and is the intelligent creator of the universe. Is that a good enough definition of God that religious people can get on board with it? Won't get burned at the stake for that?
We have found the witch, may we burn her?
If, hypothetically, something that met these guidelines was a mysterious force we can prove exists, a force that many religions have tried to describe with varying degrees of accuracy, with this proof-first definition of God, we could judge religions based on how accurately they describe God, rather than using them to prove or disprove God's existence. So, now that we know what we're looking for proof of, where do we look to find proof? Carl Jung said most people miss God because they don't look low enough. So let's try looking as low as we can.
There's a reason that the idea of meme gripped you, and there's a reason it spread. It's because you put your finger on something. So can I ask you how that idea emerged and why it attracted you?
As a Darwinian, I'm interested in the process of natural selection. Natural selection is the differential survival of replicating entities. DNA is a very excellent replicating entity, whose replication and selection has given rise to the whole of life on Earth. I wanted to make the point that DNA is not the only possible replicator you could imagine.
Right?
There might be on other, and there probably is on other planets, a different kind of replicator, not DNA. And then I thought, maybe we don't have to go to other planets. Maybe there's another replicator staring us in the face, the virus of the mind.
If the idea of memes was hiding in plain sight, what if God is too? In fact, if God is something omnipresent, what if the reason God is invisible to us is because it's something so obvious we tune it out and take it for granted? What if we already have evidence that would prove the existence of God incontrovertibly, but didn't realize it because it was too close for us to see? Too tied up with our own humanity in the uniquely human way we see the world.
I'm interested in eternal things. I'm interested in things that were true before there were any humans and will be true long after humans are extinct.
But to see past our humanity, my dear fellow humans, we have to understand it, not ignore it. We have to understand the human story we see facts through, in order to separate the facts from it.
The idea that we see the world through a story, or that a story is a description of the structure through which we see the world, I think that's accurate, because we have to prioritize our perceptions.
Well, I would prioritize my perceptions like this. The facts that I care about are the facts that are true and have evidence going for them. And I'm not that interested in symbols.
The problem with this dismissal of symbols is it ignores just how everywhere symbols are. Every word of the human language is a symbol. Every number is a symbol. Data is collected and stored in symbols. And if you don't fully understand the symbols, you can't fully understand the data. Understanding how these symbols evolved and all the implicit meanings they carry with them is a path to seeing reality more objectively, not less. A good example of how our humanity affects how we collect and interpret data is the base 10 number system, a human meme which evolved from the number of fingers we evolved with. If we'd evolved differently, our number system would have as well. Understanding how much our humanity informs our view of the world helps us to see past it into more fundamental truths of the universe, disentangling one invisible thing from another. For example, I made a video explaining why most people confuse consciousness, the pure force of awareness or discernment, with the human mind which determines what we are aware of. If you don't understand this symbolic entanglement with humanity, then the claim that every living cell, including bacteria, is conscious sounds like woo-woo nonsense. But if you do understand it, it sounds like an obvious and incontrovertible fact. If a single-celled organism can differentiate whether something is food or not, then it has the ability to differentiate, which is what consciousness is. Another thing that's hard to wrap our head around until we get over being human is the concept of time. On Earth, time appears to be a constant, but Einstein proved the relativity of time, that how quickly time passes can even be affected by variables like velocity and acceleration. So what even is time? The best answer I've found for this is one I stole from Terence McKenna. Time is a measure of novelty. In quantum physics, the Planck constant of time shows us that there is a smallest unit of time, that time is split into frames in much the same way a movie is. And each new frame is a new moment of time. Without novelty, time would not exist. The same way, if a movie had only one frame repeated, it would be indistinguishable from a still photo. Without novelty, the progression of time would collapse into a single moment, which sounds a lot like the origins of the Big Bang.
What I said to Dawkins was, I do believe in God, and the reason I said to him is that no human brain can really explain to me, or anybody, what was there before nothing. So if you believe in a Big Bang theory, well, what was there before that? Because I don't think any human brain has that power to explain or answer that question. To me, it makes perfect sense. There should be some being, entity, something which is superior to a human brain. And I would think that someone with your brain would think that too, because there are questions we simply can't answer.
Okay, that's the argument by design, that things are so complex and sophisticated that cries out for the hypothesis of something like a creator. The Big Bang proponents have a problem because it's a tenet of the Big Bang theory that the laws of physics themselves break down at the point of the singularity, and that would be the point just before the Big Bang. And when you say the laws of physics, the existence of space and time even is unknowable prior to the Big Bang, you're basically positing a miracle at the beginning of existence. And so if you get to have your miracle, there's no reason the religious types can't have theirs. You might argue about what the miracle needs to be, and I think that's an argument that has to be had. I don't like the argument by design.
Well, too bad, Jordan. We're using it anyway. One of the critiques Dawkins has proposed to Thomas Aquina's proof for God's existence is asking, if God is the thing that explains the origin of the universe, why is God immune to regress? Or, why does nothing explain God? And we run into the same mystery about the origin of the universe in quantum physics as we do in religion. And they just might be the same mystery with the same answer because they're describing the same thing. In order to give this question a satisfactory answer, the thing which existed before the origin of the universe, God if you will, would have to have a reason it operated outside the laws of time. Indeed, it would have had to have created time. Creating time seems implausible until you think about it in the same way as creating a movie. That the Big Bang was the moment the film of the universe began. So, what existed before that?
Let's talk about this issue of God, because we had a long chat about this last time. I do believe, for what it's worth, I do believe in God. I do believe in an afterlife. I find it comforting. I also find, as I said to you last time, I find it explains things which are otherwise completely inexplicable. And we had a guest on recently, Professor Stephen C. Meyer, who's a prominent believer in intelligent design, or what he calls the God hypothesis. He watched our last interview that you and I had, and this is what he said about it.
Dawkins wants to portray theistic belief as if it's equivalent to belief in fairies, and he'll concede that, well, it's possible. But I think there's a stronger argument for the theistic case. And that is that when scientists and philosophers reason from evidence, they typically use a method of reasoning that has a technical name. It's called inferring to the best explanation, where the best explanation is one where you're invoking a cause which has the kind of powers that would be required to explain the phenomenon of interest. And you correctly pointed out in your conversation with him that when you get back to that, what physicists often call the singularity, the point where matter, space, time, and energy begin to exist, the materialist is really up against a huge conundrum, because prior to the origin of matter, there is no matter to do the causing. That's what we mean by the origin of matter, that's where it starts.
Right.
And so if you want to invoke a cause which is sufficient to explain the origin of matter, you can't invoke matter. It's in principle, the materialistic explanations are in principle insufficient. So you need to invoke something which is external to the material universe and is not bounded by time and space as well. And that starts to paint a picture of the kind of cause you would need that has the sort of attributes that traditional theists have traditionally associated with God.
Now, you see, Richard Dawkins, this is the nub of, I think, my whole issue with your position on this. When you go back to the very start, what is there before that?
Physicists sometimes tell us that the word before doesn't even mean anything before the Big Bang.
Well, before isn't the right word, because if nothing exists, there is no novelty, and therefore there is no time. There's only one singular moment of nothingness. It is infinite not because it progresses infinitely, but because it does not progress. It is a stillness where nothing ever happened, nothing is happening, and nothing ever will happen. Forever. In this state of eternal singular nothingness, which I call the void, did not occur before the Big Bang, because that would imply it ended when the Big Bang happened. And if it's infinite, it can have no end. No, it would have to exist as a separate dimension underneath the reality where space-time was created, as the base reality that this universe was simulated on top of. And that would mean that some godlike force, which had no matter, energy, novelty, or any discernible qualities of its own, but held the power to create those things, would exist in the void infinitely. That it had always been there, because nothing happened before nothing. And it would always be there, forever. The same way, when we are dreaming, our bodies are the base reality that we are dreaming out of. God in the void would be like the sleeping body of the universe, dreaming it into existence. So, if a dimension called the void exists, which serves as a substrate base reality underneath the more complex levels of reality, containing only God or a godlike force, which created matter and energy and space-time itself, how did that God create matter and energy, and how do we know that nothing created God? Well, we know from physics that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. They can only change form. And indeed, they can change from one into the other. Einstein's equation E = mc squared, which is the abbreviated form of the statement energy, is mass, or matter, multiplied by the speed of light squared, shows that matter and energy are actually the same thing, just in different forms. So what if there was a third form? What if the things we call dark matter and dark energy were actually a third state of this one thing that cannot be created or destroyed in a state that we cannot see, much like we can see ice and we can see water, but water vapor becomes invisible to us, although they are all forms of the same H2O. And what if this third state was the same thing as the invisible force I've been referring to as God. This would all explain how God created matter and energy if neither can be created or destroyed, if it is a third state of them, and also explains why God cannot have a creator, because by its nature, its inability to be created or destroyed is a simple law of physics. But this still leaves the question of intelligent design on the table. So to answer whether intelligent design is possible, we have to answer, what is intelligence? I posit that there are two traits that comprise intelligence: curiosity and creativity, and genius is the synthesis of both. So God would have to have the properties of curiosity and creativity. But would it necessarily have to have brought species into existence fully formed in order for their existence to count as intelligent design? Take the watchmaker argument for the existence of God. The idea that when we look at a watch, we can tell it had a creator because of its complexity, and that the same must be true of humans and animals. But watchmakers didn't invent watches as a fully formed blueprint all at once, although if Nikola Tesla had been a watchmaker, he probably would have.
I read Nikola Tesla's biography a long while back, and it was extremely interesting. And he claimed, and I have no reason to disbelieve him, that entire inventions, machines, would pop into the theater of his imagination, detailed out to the point where he knew the angles on the screws that held the metal together. And he would try to write them down in something draw them out in something approximating something that would be, that you could make a blueprint out of, let's say, in that much detail. And sometimes a new invention would pop into his head so quickly that it would obliterate the previous one. He had to work very quickly to keep up.
Instead, it was a process of continual trial and error, and their ability to assess what worked and what didn't was the intelligence intrinsic in the design. Dawkins says in his essay, The Improbability of God, eyes and wings cannot spring into existence in a single step. That would be like having the almost infinite luck to hit upon the combination number that unlocked a large bank vault. But if you spun the dials of the lock at random, and every time you got a little bit closer to the lucky number, the vault door creaked open another chink, you would soon have the door open. Essentially, that is the secret of how evolution by natural selection achieves what once seemed impossible. So the feedback loop that allows a being to perceive when it is warmer or colder to what works is necessary for complexity to arise. But what if God actually was the force of physics that created that feedback loop? What if evolution then actually is God's process of intelligent design? What if, when we watch a species evolve, we are actually witnessing the creative process of God at work? Furthermore, if what religions are trying to point to when they describe God was actually a force of physics hiding in plain sight, we wouldn't just see it in evolution, but in the creation of reality on a much more fundamental level. It would be evident as the very force which turned chaos into order. And indeed, in quantum physics, we see that occurring within phenomena such as the double slit experiment or Schrodinger's cat, instances where chaotic quantum superposition is turned into order by the force of awareness. When I was looking for a force hiding in plain sight that shares a definition with God, an invisible force of the universe that is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, that existed before time and is the intelligent creator of the universe, I asked myself, what if it became invisible to us because it is what makes things visible? Unmeasurable because it is what is doing the measuring. Like a ruler cannot measure itself, an eye cannot look at itself. What if it's hiding in plain sight because sight isn't so very plain after all. All of these paths of reasoning and more led me to one singular conclusion. God is consciousness. God is consciousness. So, what is consciousness? Golly gee Louise, if only someone made an in-depth video explaining what it is and the common misconceptions about it. Alright, this has been a whirlwind introduction to my theory of reality, the Order of MayyHemm. Not the way I planned it, but when this debate dropped, it was too good an opportunity to pass up responding to. I would be beside myself with excitement if either of the doctors got around to watching this. Nothing but respect to both of you. Now, if this left you with more questions than answers, don't panic. I will be expounding on all of these ideas and more in future videos. Besides the videos I've already posted explaining some of them, as well as answering all of your questions, and I mean all, in the comments. So, subscribe to see the next episode, leave a comment and you will get an answer. And leave a like if you want to tell the algorithm this didn't suck. And last but not least, I'd like to give an honorable mention to the fact that the pinstripes on Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's suit say, "Clean your room." Until next time, fare thee well, love, mayhem.